Pour yourself a sweet tea, pull up a lawn chair, and turn the page with us. You're listening to Right On Mississippi, a podcast taking you inside the minds of America's most treasured wordsmiths. Hosted by Ebony Lumumba and brought to you by the Mississippi Book Festival, the South's literary lawn party. Chapter 8, Ron Nixon. Ron Nixon is the author of Selling Apartheid South Africa's Global Propaganda War. He's also currently a Washington correspondent for the New York Times. Ron will be accepting a new position with the Associated Press as International Investigations Editor in January 2019. Ron has reported in countries such as Belgium, Nigeria, Canada, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Uganda, and South Africa, to name a few. He's one of the founders of the Ida B. Wells Society for Investigative Reporting and a native of Lauderdale, Mississippi, not to be confused with Lauderdale County. All right, this is Right On Mississippi. I am Ebony Lumumba as usual. And sitting across from me, I have a surrogate brother, adopted brother, what's the proper term? Ron Nixon. Hey, Ron.
Hey, how are you?
I'm great. I'm so glad that you're here.
Yeah, it's good to be home.
Yeah, Ron is a homeboy, so he's a Mississippi native, but you're in D.C.
Yes.
You spend most of your time in D.C. For the most part, you've been New York Times reporter.
14 years.
14?
Yes.
14 years.
Right.
That's a lifetime in my head.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now you're moving on to even bigger, brighter things, Associated Press. Tell us about that position.
Well, I don't know if it's bigger and brighter. New York Times is pretty big. But,
Yeah.
But the Associated Press is a global news organization, obviously.
Right.
And it's everywhere. So I was just named on Thursday the International Investigations Editor for the Associated Press.
Whoop, whoop. You say it so cavalierly, like, oh, no big deal. That's pretty huge.
It is. It's huge. And, I've gotten, a ton of email and social stuff on social media. And of people reminding me how huge it is.
Social media, that's, that's family these days. That's the most intimate.
Well, it's people, like there's a guy who I met like years ago in Brazil was sending me like, oh, congratulations. Remember what we were talking about? I was like, whoa, okay.
Yeah, sure do.
So yeah, it's big in a number of ways. One, it's, there aren't that many African Americans in, roles, like that. So
you're blazing some trails.
Yeah,
For posterity. That's always a good thing.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I'm excited. I mean, I'm looking forward to, doing big investigations that have impact on public policy, or at least overseeing these investigations.
Because that's not happening in the real world.
Get out of my head of being a reporter to being an editor. That the
How different is that?
Well, as a reporter, you're responsible for you, and your reporters are, you're assigned stuff by editors, or you pitch things to editors, and all you're responsible for is you. As an editor, I have 5 people that report directly to me, and not only is it 5 people, but it's 5 people in different parts of the world. So that's a challenge.
My gosh.
Yeah.
So you've got all of these mindsets, these kind of cultural implications.
Right.
No big deal. You can handle it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. You're a force. So I want to talk about, I know a little bit about this, but your start with writing. You didn't start out producing these really brilliant articles. This wasn't really your intended trajectory. Just tell us a little bit about how you started. For those, especially for folks who may want to step into your shoes.
You mean how I started writing or how I ended up writing?
Is there a difference?
There's a difference. So no, my goal was not to be a writer. Initially my goal was to be Batman. And then I couldn't.
That was
exactly
mine too.
Right. Yeah. So I couldn't, the whole cave,
Alfred.
Alfred, Batmobile, being a billionaire.
Well, then there was that part.
Yeah. So I,
only difference.
kind of didn't work. So
all the pieces weren't in place.
then, I wanted to actually, I was a musician. So that's what I did. So
I knew that, but I can't remember what instrument.
It's not one, it's several. So I, at one point, could play about 21 different instruments.
And see, I don't even think I knew there were 21 different instruments that existed.
So I wanted to do basically what for older people, what Quincy Jones did. For younger people, what Pharrell does. So,
just dropping a few names, like the most dynamic folks.
And so that's what I want to do.
Have you seen that documentary? The Quincy?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
It's insane. Okay.
It is.
I digress.
But it is insane. It's worth watching if, people
several times because you're going to miss something.
Right. Should go and listen to that. So watch it rather. I wanted to do music scores for movies and for TV. So that's what my goal. I wasn't, I can't.
That's not done. You can still
sing.
Do that.
So I wasn't gonna be like, Michael or Prince or definitely not Luther or James Ingram or somebody like that.
James Ingram, you just took me back.
So hey, that's my boy childhood. James. But what I always saw the stuff that Quincy Jones did with like Sanford and Son and, that theme song. Yeah, that's Quincy Jones.
He literally did everything. He's kind of the whiz. Like
he truly is the whiz, right? And then, in the 80s, you had people like Mike Post who did the music for the A-Team and all of those
iconic
shows. Yeah.
Soundtrack.
But then what really, I got started it for me was, I'd already graduated high school after this was in college as a music major, Miami Vice, because
shut up.
Yeah, it was like the perfect combination of
it wasn't really a long music video.
It was right. It was really long.
It's the first time they would have like whole scenes and it would just be like a song.
And the music was the thing. So the music was like really driving that
it was like the script wasn't awesome.
So that's what I want to do because it's like an art to see these things and some of my favorite musicians have gone on to do the Stuart Copeland, who is from the Police. He does soundtracks now. Jesse Johnson, the guitarist for the Times, the Time rather.
Mm-hmm.
Morris Day.
And the Time. Yeah.
So Jesse did like Pretty in Pink, and he did
I just
other
watched
things.
that. The
song from Five Heartbeats, Nights Like This. Jesse Johnson wrote that for
the fact that you know these things. Like, I just want to stop here and mention, I did mention in the bio that you are a walking encyclopedia.
Okay.
You know things that just the average human being doesn't know, and I dig it.
Well, when you're hanging out at these cocktail parties and people want to talk, so
you're recording it mentally.
Well, no, you just want to throw out a couple of facts and, just so you could.
Fodder for that.
Yeah, exactly. But there weren't a lot of people doing that, right?
For sure.
So, and then, the godfather of them all is John Williams, who did Star Wars and Jaws and all of that iconic music that from
people use as ringtones.
Right, exactly, right. So, that was kind of the thing. And so that was my trajectory and I was headed that way. But then I wrote this novel. And it wasn't a very good one.
How old were you?
I was 20 or so and I was in South Carolina. I had, my mom didn't give me $1 million as a small
Yours
loan.
Either?
No. I was like, Mom,
Mom.
Can you help a brother out with just $1 million? That's all. That's all I'm asking for.
Cool meal.
Yeah. Not
one of those telegrams
not
from
14,
Coming to America.
Right, just give. So I joined the ROTC in college and, I'd gone to basic training, for the Army, at Fort Jackson. So I was walking past this little place. It's called Juju Publishing. And so, I was like, oh, cool. It's like a publishing company, right? And Juju, obviously, I thought, well, it's a black publishing company, right? Yeah. So, great. So I went the next day with my little manuscript and the lady was like, no, we don't really do that. We're like a newspaper. So this guy then comes out and goes, can you write? Because I need somebody to write. And I was like, yeah.
I know the alphabet.
Yeah, I can kind of do that. So that's how I, started in journalism, was like purely accidental, pitching a really bad, it wasn't even like a novel. It was like 30 pages. So, you got to
novella.
You got to the, all the plot and everything was done fairly quickly. And you could read the first couple of paragraphs and know who did it, right?
Who done it.
So that's how I got started. Had no desire to be a writer, to be a journalist, and let alone write a book. I mean, that's the thing. I always told people that I don't have passion enough about any topic to actually write a book.
That much about it.
To write a book, no.
And then pops out Selling Apartheid, which is phenomenal, by the way.
Yeah, thank you.
I feel like we should have the Dose of Keith's music playing because you very literally are one of the most interesting men in the world. Okay. So Selling Apartheid, let's see, 2 years ago?
So yes, 2 years released in the U.S. It was actually released in South Africa in 2015.
Cool.
But yeah, so the U.S. is a 2-year release. And it's actually still getting some traction. I was just on WUNC over the debate about the statue Silent Sam. So the reporter from UNC called me up because he read my book, because William Keyes is the only African American on UNC's board of trustees. But he was also a lobbyist for the apartheid government. So he called, so an African American was paid back in 1985, the mid 80s. He was paid $400,000 a year. I would like to make $400,000 a year now. Right.
Doing just about anything.
So he...
my gosh.
So,
small fortune back then.
Right. So he's on the board of trustees, and they're obviously debating whether or not to do a Silent Sam, the Confederate statue. But the reporter at WUNC had read my book, and he was like, hey, tell me about this guy. So then he interviews Keyes and asked him about it, and he was like, oh, no, I wasn't a lobbyist. People attributed a lot of things to me, but I really wasn't. I was just trying to facilitate conversation.
But the paper trail says.
So, exactly. So the reporter then calls me back and said, well, hey, this is what he said. And I said, well, 2 words, ha ha. And then, went to my computer and emailed him William Keyes lobbying documents from the 80s.
Love it.
Yeah, so,
treasure trove.
Yeah. So, the book I got a good review in, Cambridge, I think is Journal of African History. And I'm like, oh my God, it got reviewed by Cambridge University. Ooh,
yes.
So it's been interesting. It got a pretty good reception, a much bigger reception in South Africa, obviously, because they were closer to it, but.
Yeah, and the knowledge of apartheid is still very present.
Right. Well, they still live it.
Exactly.
In the aftermaths of it. But
like now we're teaching it as history in America, but I mean,
and
they're dealing with
a lot of the vets of, the apartheid movement have said, the anti-apartheid movement here in the U.S. have said, hey, this is great. I like how you did this. It adequately reflects, because a lot of things that they thought they couldn't prove, but the benefit of hindsight, I have access to all of this stuff because I got archives in UK, in France, in Germany.
That's remarkable.
And South Africa. So all of these things that they suspected, I was able to prove.
Valid.
Actually did
Which
happen.
is so cool, Ryan, because, obviously, I want to see this as a docuseries or something, because you see all of these narratives like that popping up on like Netflix and Amazon Prime, where you're telling the story of a nation or a certain time period of nation. And that's what Selling Apartheid is doing, and then linking it to American history. And so there is this sort of cult culture now of wanting to know more. And then I love that, the average Joe is becoming a super nerd in terms of what exists in archives.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, archives are like great. I get excited about. Right?
You and me both.
Yeah, I was sitting, when I did the research for the book on the American side, I went out to the National Archives and I'm looking at these old because you're looking at that living history, right? You're looking at the original letters that these people wrote.
They did ever. I spent some time in the archives that we have here in Mississippi, which are actually right across the street.
Right.
But and I'm looking at Eudora Welty's collection a great deal, but I love that there was never any indication when these things were being produced that a person like me would be looking at them, right?
Exactly.
In this time period. And so that makes them all the more like salacious and juicy.
Right.
And
that's what I did with my research, and we're still in the process of it, but I've donated it all to Wits University in South Africa so that those researchers and journalists in South Africa can see the original documents if they want.
That's wonderful. I mean, a lot of legwork goes into something like that too.
Yeah.
With all the rights and permissions.
I still have a whole storage facility just for the research for that. Well,
Right. So is there something else coming out of that, or you did Selling Apartheid, you're moving on to something completely different?
I just talked to my agent who's excited about a proposal for a book that I'm doing on narco tunnels. These are drug tunnels that are dug underneath the border to smuggle drugs.
Magic word, border, like the Pee Wee Herman crazy music comes on. It's a buzzword.
Yeah, so it's called, the working title is called a freaking cool tunnel, but not freaking. Because
that title is gnarly.
It's the reason that this is sort of germane to this conversation is that the person that started the use of narco tunnels is El Chapo, who's actually now on trial in New York.
Right. And on Netflix.
Right. And on Netflix. But that's what he said when the original tunnel was completed. He said, hey, tell the Colombians to send out the drugs they have because my architect has built me a freaking cool tunnel.
But not freaking.
Right.
More an expletive.
Exactly. Right.
So this is the scariest thing is you can do all this research and in all of these different parts of the world, which draw in this new position that you have as well. And there are these connections. Right. And so for a conspiracy theorist like myself, right? I'm like making connections between everything and everyone in life. Like the person that took my order is
exactly.
Taking
something suspicious about that.
Me. This is so interesting. Listen, if you don't have Selling Apartheid, please pick it up so that you're ready for a freaking cool tunnel when it comes out. Because, I mean, not that this is going to be some trilogy or something, but it's the same vein of just deep research and kind of understanding the ties that bind.
Yeah.
So, I'm interested. You've spent a great deal of time in South Africa. We're in Mississippi now. We're both home right now in Mississippi. And recently I had a conversation with Robert St. John, Wyatt Waters, and they talked about the similarities between Mississippi art and food culture and South Italy. I had another conversation with Salman Rushdie, who talked again about these similarities, cultural similarities between South Asia, India specifically, right? And Mississippi. So in my mind, I'm super excited because what this does is solidify, validate this notion of a global South existence. But I wonder, besides the obvious, what connections you've drawn between South Africa and your home here in Mississippi?
Look, I mean, as someone, from the state, obviously the history of the state dovetails perfectly with the history of South Africa. And Mississippi was one of the states that supported the South African government.
Say that again.
Yeah. They passed a resolution supporting the apartheid government. And
not common knowledge.
Also in my book, I talk about how when the White Citizens Councils were set up, people in South Africa wrote to them saying, "Hey, great idea."
How did you do that?
And there was a group, and I'm forgetting the name of it because I'm old. That was made up of Southerners and people in South Africa. It was like a pen pal thing. So they wrote to each other.
A diabolical sort of pen
So, that's all in Selling Apartheid, about the connections between apartheid South Africa and.
So these are not like theoretical. We're talking about solid connections.
This is like real stuff.
Stuff we don't hear about.
Right. And so, and there are other connections too, but I think for African Americans, you see a lot of similarities in the way people act, and I
really like what?
Well, you see these black women going to church in South Africa, and they look just like your mom. They got the hat
Big
with
mama.
the flower, and there's actually a word
I love that.
That's like in several of the languages for Big Mama, right? That it varies depending on the language, but there is a word like that. There's this respect for elders like we do when they act like elders, that is. So we,
Waning.
I think it's also, just how we approach things because of the history and the forces that we have had to survive and the things that we've had to overcome. I think you talk to a South African about your experiences here, and they would immediately get it. Yeah. And the same thing for us when you talk to a South African, they immediately get it. You don't have to explain it. You don't have to say, oh, well, this is what segregation is.
Give analogies.
They immediately understand.
Got it.
And, a friend of mine, I was talking to him about, our ancestors, and one of the reasons I wear suits all this time is because one of my uncles.
As a matter of fact, I don't think I've ever seen you without a suit.
Right. Well, one of my uncles, who was like the sharpest dude that I ever saw, because he was always like, you need to be presentable. Yeah. And so I was talking to my friend in South Africa who grew up in Soweto, and it was like the same thing. It was like, his uncle was always like this guy who you always need to be presentable, because it's like, your mom always told you to put on like clean underwear in case you get in a car accident. And I'm like, okay, so.
But no seatbelt.
That's what you're concerned about. The underwear, not
my lungs, my organs,
broken legs or anything. Nope, just make sure you got on clean underwear. Yep.
But it ties back to like her not being embarrassed, right? And then thus being a good mother, which these narratives about Black women not being able to.
But see, that's the thing again, in that when you talk to people in South Africa and you talk to people here, that is a common theme, that you don't embarrass your family, right? Because you are representing wherever you are. You are representing your family.
You're taking people with you into every
and so you don't, you get out there acting a fool. You're like embarrassing them, right? So. There's a lot, and there are obviously connections between people coming to the U.S. And Mississippi as well, and people from Mississippi going to South Africa. And just, again, that history of struggle and that history of resistance. People communicated. I was surprised the level of communications between Black South Africans and Black Americans, including people in Mississippi. Yeah. I mean, I didn't know how involved Martin Luther King, not a Mississippian, but, how involved he was with the African National Congress.
Well, it's not part of the sort of packaged accepted narrative.
Yeah, in the late 50s, he and Eleanor Roosevelt co-chaired a anti-apartheid thing against South Africa to call for sanctions.
A lot about Eleanor Roosevelt. I mean, about fundamentally who she was and how
she's
groundbreaking she was in that position,
both as a first lady and just as a lady on her own, because even after her husband was dead, she still did these things. So that was kind of surprising. I didn't realize just the level of, and there's a lot of Mississippi stuff in the book. There was a professor, a journalism professor, actually, that was not forget his name, but he did a lot of the propaganda stuff from Ole Miss. Did a lot of propaganda stuff.
Really now?
Not picking on Ole Miss.
He just pointed at me and
Ole Miss folk, not picking on you. Just saying. And then there was an African-American business owner from Meridian who was trying to do business in South Africa.
Wow.
He was also the one of the leaders of the local NAACP saying, if I can get in there, I'll change things up. Because he wants to say, well, we can share stuff or sell stuff to black businesses for people's hair and all of that stuff. But again, I mean, you are bolstering the apartheid government. Exactly. However you want to look at it. So, yeah, there's a lot of stuff in there. Easterlin, the senator from he went over to South Africa and said, look, I don't know what apartheid is, but I like it.
Sounds good to me, y'all.
Yeah. So, again, there's all of these Mississippi ties there.
So those Mississippi ties, those were just part of the accurate history. It wasn't because you're a Mississippian that these found their way into your. That's interesting because, I was going to ask how much of Mississippi goes with you. You go a lot of different places across the globe. And I find that when I travel especially, that the Mississippi becomes heavier on my shoulders. Like I'm representing.
In a way because of, it's like Mississippi is complex because you find yourself at times going off about your home state, but also defending it.
It's like family. I can talk about them.
Right, yeah. So I can talk about my cousin Ray Ray, but you can't talk about Ray Ray.
You can't talk about Ray Ray. I'm a fight.
Okay, Ray Ray's a drunk, but you can't say Ray Ray's a drunk. That's my cousin. So it's like that, but look, I always consider myself and present myself, I'm a kid from Lauderdale, Mississippi, and know people, not just Lauderdale County, Lauderdale, Mississippi.
Folks probably try to correct you on where you're from.
They always do.
Like, you mean
Lauderdale County? No. Lauderdale.
What's the population?
Okay, so allegedly it's 500 people.
Allegedly.
I kind of doubt. I don't know. I've never seen 500 people in Lauderdale.
Your count is a little different.
Probably 350 and maybe 150 of those are like relatives. So
who are leaving after Christmas.
Yeah, exactly. So, it's cousin Ray Ray and Pookie and them. So
Pookie and them is like anywhere from 2 to 3.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Right. At least 3. So, but again, that's who I am. Right. That's what I am. I'm not one of those folks who I know. People tend to think journalists are these like Ivy League educated folks and, grew up in the East Coast. And I'm like, I grew up in East Mississippi.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Right? But not the East Coast. Right?
Mississippi.
We don't have a coast.
We don't have any coast.
Right? So, again, that's who I am. That's what made me that is what I tend to represent. And, I have never just said I'm ashamed to be from Mississippi. I'm not. I'm actually proud to be from Mississippi. I don't always like what the state does, but it's still home.
It's still home. Yeah. That's beautiful. One of the things I laud you for is how often you are home. And I know you still got family here, but your actions demonstrate that this is a meaningful space to you.
Definitely.
And so, I would say some recent events, but recent and historical events have caused folks to disavow Mississippi. I've described it before and I'll say it again. We tend to become the portrait of Dorian Gray. Everyone kind of wants to project all things negative on Mississippi and make you feel better. Right. Because you're not here or you're not from here. Right. But I appreciate your appreciation for home.
Definitely.
So one of the things that I try to ask guests, unless we just start to digress and go off in a different direction, is to tell me what Mississippi means to you just in a word. Mm-hmm.
Mississippi means if I had to use just one word, like family.
Family, yeah.
Because even people who aren't like biologically related, like you and I, right? Yeah. We've met in person, twice?
Twice, maybe 3 times.
And you're like my sister.
Yeah.
So
like sending pictures of my kids. Forcing you to look at pictures of my kids.
It's not even forcing. I'm asking okay, when can I see the kids? But it's like that. And it's not just, something that is, it's forced. People in Mississippi are nice. Mm-hmm. And even, the racism and all of that stuff that exists, right? And you can't gloss over that. But still, people are nice. They may talk noise about you, but people will speak to you. I always was walking around in Meridian, and people were like, "Hey, how you doing?" And you're like, in DC, nobody used to say that. And people
trying to rob me?
Right. People speak to you in DC. You're like, okay, why are they talking to me? Right? What's up with that? Right. But, and that's like refreshing. It's a little scary at first because you have to remember, I'm home.
Yeah. Family.
Yeah.
That's a wonderful note to end on. Mississippi means that and much more, I think, to the both of us. Thanks, Ron.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Right on, Mississippi, and right on, Ron. We want that book.
Thank you.
Cool freaking tunnel.